The morning fog clung to Lake Wildstone like a ghost refusing to move on, curling around the cedar trees and softening the edges of everything it touched. My cabin, weathered, remote, and unapologetically old, sat where it always had, a silent witness to 5 generations of pharaohs who'd called this patch of earth home. I'd just returned after 6 months in the Yukon, following wolves with a camera and surviving on powdered soup and glacier water. Now all I wanted was stillness, the kind only this place could offer. I had barely taken my first sip of coffee when the horn blared sharp, grating, and entirely out of place. The sound tore through the quiet like a bullet. I stepped outside, boots untied and mug in hand, and followed the noise to the edge of my private gravel road. There she was, standing with the righteous posture of someone used to being obeyed, arms folded, lips pursed and clad in a windbreaker bearing the all-too-familiar logo Ridgeview, Lakeside HOA. "Excuse me," she called out, voice high and clipped. "You can't be here. This is Ridgeview, HOA property." I stared at her, a petite woman in her late 50s, platinum hair in a vice-tight bun, and a clipboard clutched like a sword. The kind of woman who made elementary school principals look like party clowns. Her name would come later, but I already knew her type, the overzealous enforcer, the self-appointed queen of compliance, a Karen through and through. I walked down the slope toward the gravel pull-off, heart sinking. "Ma'am, you're on private land. You crossed a locked gate." She smirked. "Didn't see a proper HOA-approved notice on it. No chain ether, just some old rusty latch. As far as I'm concerned, this is common access property now. Ridgeview passed a motion last month expanding jurisdiction. That's not how land ownership works." She tapped her clipboard. "I'm Karen Witherspoon, president of the HOA, and this cabinet's out of compliance. Non-standard roofing material, an unauthorized dock, and unapproved shoreline vegetation." I squinted at her, trying to make sense of the absurdity. "This cabin's been here since 1879, which makes it all the more overdue for inspection," she snapped. "I'm issuing a preliminary citation. You'll need to vacate until we can assess whether this structure poses a threat to community standards." "Lady," I said, tone firming, "this isn't Ridgeview. You don't have jurisdiction. And you've already committed trespassing." Karen's eyes flared, voice rising with theatrical indignation. "I knew you'd be difficult. Typical squatter behavior. I'm calling the sheriff." I stepped back, jaw tightening. "Go ahead, Sheriff Myers," and I go back a ways. Unfazed, she whipped out her phone and dialed 911. Pacing in small, furious circles as she spoke to dispatch like she was reporting a hostage crisis. I stood still, watching the lake's mist begin to lift behind her like it too wanted to see how this would unfold. 15 minutes later, a county cruiser rolled down the road. Sheriff Hank Myers stepped out, heavy boots crunching gravel, his weathered face already showing the early signs of exasperation. "Well, hell," he said, eyeing me, then Karen. "I should have known this was you jocks." Karen stormed forward, waving her clipboard like a badge. "Sheriff, thank God, this man refuses to leave HOA-controlled land. He's hostile, argumentative, and clearly unstable. I want him evicted immediately." Myers glanced at me with raised brows. I shrugged. "She cut the chain on my gate." "That's community access," Karen barked. "Your fencing violates Section 12 of our shared use clause." Myers crossed his arms. "Ma'am, this here's the Pharaoh property. Always has been. County line sits 2 miles that way. Your HOA doesn't extend out here." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. "But we voted. The board agreed. We expanded." Myers chuckled without humor. "That's not how property law works." Karen turned to me, fury in her eyes. "You'll regret this. I'll take this up with the commissioner. I know people." I took a slow sip of coffee. "You might want to check who that is before you start swinging names." She narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Instead, she stormed back to her golf cart. Yes, she had driven a golf cart down my dirt road and spun it around in a spray of dust and indignation. Myers shook his head. "She's gonna be a handful." I watched the dust settle. Let her dig the hole herself. Because what Karen didn't know, and what I wasn't quite ready to tell her yet, was that I wasn't just some reclusive cabin dweller. I owned the land her precious HOA sat on, and I wasn't in the mood to be generous. The following morning I awoke to the clattering of metal and the unmistakable growl of a generator. I stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in hand, only to find 3 men in orange vests hammering stakes into the ground 10 feet from my cabin's front door. A large white banner unfurled between 2 poles. "Future site of Ridgeview, community clubhouse, member access only." I didn't need a second guess who was behind this dot. Karen stood beside the workers with her clipboard, barking directions like a general on a battlefield. I marched down the slope. "This isn't a negotiation," I called. "You're trespassing." Again, she turned, unfazed. "I'm exercising newly approved community privileges. The HOA development plan includes this parcel for communal use." I looked at the workers. "You all have permits." They hesitated. Karen snapped. "They don't need permits. This is an HOA-managed improvement. We've assumed administrative authority." "You assumed wrong," I said, teeth clenched. "Last warning, pack up and leave." Karen gave a smug smile. You can't intimidate me. I've dealt with your type before, lone wolves who think they're above the rules. I walked back up to the cabin, grabbed my phone, and called Sheriff Myers. Again. By the time he arrived, Karen had the audacity to start outlining the clubhouse footprint with spray paint. The orange lines cut through my driveway. Myers stepped out of his cruiser, hands already on his hips. Karen, you really don't know how to take a hint. I'm acting under the will of the Ridgeview community, she declared. This man's continued refusal to comply with HOA directives endangers community harmony. Karen, he said with exaggerated patience. This land is owned by Jackson Farrow, privately deeded, recorded. You're vandalizing private property. She shoved a folder into his hands. This is our annexation packet. It was passed by a majority vote last quarter. He flipped through it, eyes glazing over. You don't have the authority to annex anything outside your original charter. And that charter was approved by the county. Who signs those approvals? Karen. She blinked. I leaned against the porch railing, watching her closely. I don't know, she admitted. That'd be the county commission, Myers said, and the chair of that commission is the same guy whose cabin you're trying to bulldoze. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She turned toward me slowly, suspicion flaring in her eyes. She said. I gave her a mild smile. Not just a camera guy and wolf chaser. I sign off on every zoning change, boundary request, and infrastructure proposal in this county. Karen stood frozen, her facade cracking. Myers tossed the file onto her clipboard. I suggest you tell your board to stand down before this gets uglier. Karen's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She turned to the workers. We're done here. They didn't argue. I watched them pack up and drive off, the tires of their trailer crunching over the fresh orange lines they'd drawn on my land. Karen lingered a few seconds longer, her pride visibly bruised. She gave me a glare sharp enough to slice bark off a tree. This isn't over, she hissed. I nodded. Didn't figure it was. She left in silence but not defeat. That was the problem. Later that night, I sat on my dock with a lantern and a glass of bourbon, listening to bullfrogs and the occasional hoot of an owl. But the lake wasn't calm anymore. It felt like a war was bubbling just beneath the surface. I wasn't worried about her fake clubhouse or her imaginary annexation. What I feared was how far she'd go once she realized her ego was tangled in this. Karen wasn't the type to retreat. She was the kind who doubled down, built committees, and called emergency meetings, and I knew exactly where this was headed because I'd seen it before. Power doesn't sleep quietly, it lashes out. 3 days later, the harassment escalated from absurd to calculated. It began with a certified letter taped to my front door, a formal cease and desist order from Ridgeview Lakeside HOA, citing multiple violations of community standards, including visual disharmony, unregulated wildlife activity, and unauthorized construction of shoreline features. The language was laughable if it weren't so alarmingly aggressive. She was trying to build a paper trail. To someone unfamiliar with the law, it might have looked legitimate, but I'd written the zoning ordinances she was now misquoting. Still, I knew Karen. She wasn't aiming for legality, she was aiming for optics. She wanted to bully me out, make me look like the unruly outsider disturbing her manicured utopia. Then came the drones. They buzzed overhead in the early evening like oversized hornets, hovering above my deck and windows. One even dipped low over my dock as I sat outside, trying to enjoy dinner. They bore Ridgeview branding, small decals on each chassis. Community Surveillance Initiative, safety first. I took out my shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. Not at the drones, just skyward. The buzzing stopped, and the machine zipped away like a scolded dog. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Sheriff Myers, I answered. Let me guess, Karen reported a terrorist act. You're psychic, he sighed. She claims you shot at a Ridgeview HOA aerial patrol drone. Wants you arrested for community aggression, I chuckled. Did you tell her those patrols are illegal without county registration? Already did. I also reminded her that recreational drone use doesn't include peeping into windows. He paused. But she's not backing down, Jocks. She's trying to turn public opinion. Says you're dangerous, that you're squatting on community property with a firearm. She wants a confrontation. I muttered, no doubt. He said I'd keep a camera rolling. You know she's got hers. The next morning I received 5 more HOA citations by courier. Apparently I had committed additional crimes, including non-regulation, Adirondack, chess, and improper wildlife feeding due to a bird feeder on my porch, unauthorized flag display. It was a vintage Farrow family crest. She was baiting me, one letter at a time, but the final straw wasn't paper, it was plywood. I returned from town that afternoon to find a crew nailing boards over my windows. They'd already blocked off the front door. Karen stood nearby in her HOA windbreaker, directing the hammering like an orchestra conductor. I slammed my truck door and stormed up the path. What the hell are you doing? She didn't flinch. Enforcing a code-mandated safety lockdown. Your structure has been deemed a non-compliant hazard pending review by the Ridgeview Architectural Board. I couldn't even speak for a moment. The sheer audacity left me stunned. You're boarding up my home. Karen tilted her head, eyes gleaming. Illegal structure. You've failed to attend multiple compliance hearings. I never agreed to be part of your HOA. That's not up to you anymore, she snapped. You're on annexed land. I turned to the workers. Anyone here have a permit? They looked at Karen. One man lowered his hammer. We were told this was HOA mandated, is it not? I stepped aside and pointed. You see that stone marker near the road? They nodded. That's the county line. Everything beyond it, including this cabin, belongs to me, not the HOA, not the board. Me, Karen stormed up. Don't listen to him. He's manipulating you. This is official HOA action. I pulled out my phone and began recording. Let's have it on the record. Then, she lunged at the phone, but I stepped back. Sheriff Myers arrived minutes later. He must have already been on his way. Anticipating the call, he got out, surveyed the boarded windows and exhaled heavily. Karen, he said, with a tone like a tired teacher scolding a petulant child. This is criminal vandalism. She stiffened. It's code enforcement. No, he said flatly. It's trespassing, destruction of private property, and attempted unlawful seizure. I'm placing you under temporary detainment pending investigation. She sputtered, eyes wide. You can't do this, I run Ridgeview. Myers raised an eyebrow. And Jackson runs the county. That silence, the one that follows a snapped power line or a broken dam. That silence swallowed her whole as Myers led her to the cruiser. I caught her eyes. There was no remorse, only disbelief that her self-made authority had finally hit a wall she couldn't bulldoze. I turned back toward the cabin, plywood half-nailed to my windows. She wanted war. Now, she'd get it with every tool the law and land could offer. Karen posted bail before sundown. Her smug face was back on my property the very next morning, though this time she stayed just on her side of the county line, barking orders from a megaphone like some sort of HOA general. Her tone was clipped, her phrasing theatrical. This is not over. You're delaying the inevitable. The Ridgeview community will reclaim this lakefront. Mark my words. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because while Karen raged, the wheels of actual power had already begun turning, and I was the one turning them. I called an emergency session of the county commission. As chair, I rarely used my executive override, but this situation more than qualified. Within hours, we passed a resolution to audit the Ridgeview Lakeside HOA for zoning violations, illegal expansion, unauthorized land use, and harassment of non-member property owners. Karen didn't even see it coming. The next morning, her office was raided by the same county compliance officers she once tried to manipulate. Turns out her annexation packet was built on a foundation of sand, fake votes, falsified meeting minutes, and a shady land use consultant who had already skipped town. Her plan to force my cabin into Ridgeview authority wasn't just overreaching, was outright fraud. And it was only the beginning. 2 HOA board members resigned before noon. A third tried to delete the association's digital records before the audit team retrieved them from the cloud. When the press got hold of the story, it spread like wildfire. HOA president faces county investigation for land grab scheme. Sheriff detains HOA leader in borderline tyranny. She tried to evict the landowner. Turns out he owns the county. Karen became a punchline overnight. Memes, hashtags, video breakdowns of her meltdown at my property line. Even late-night talk shows took jabs at her. The internet did what it does best, turned her into digital toast. But I wasn't done yet. I hosted a press conference on the cabin. Sheriff Myers by my side, along with County Commissioner Ellie Banks and a dozen local reporters. Behind me, the lake gleamed in the sun, and the freshly sanded cedar siding of the cabin stood proud and defiant. I stepped to the mic. For weeks, I began. A private citizen myself was harassed by a group abusing the appearance of authority. What began as an HOA boundary dispute became a campaign of targeted intimidation, lawless intrusion, and an attempted hostile seizure of private land. Flashes popped, pens scribbled. But this wasn't just about one person. It was about principle. It was about reminding folks that power, real power, comes with accountability. That bullies hiding behind clipboards and bylaws don't get to rewrite county law. I held up a thick document, stamped and signed. Effective today, Lakeside HOA is suspended from exercising any zoning or expansionary authority until the county concludes a full audit. All annexation attempts are void. All citations issued outside of HOA jurisdiction are legally null, and Karen Witherspoon, I smiled, has been removed from her position. Reporters erupted into questions. I answered only one. What's next for your land, Mr. Farrow? I turned toward the lake, let the silence hang for a beat. My great-great-grandfather built this cabin. My family has protected this land longer than Ridgeview's even existed. Starting next month, we'll open a public trail system through part of the Farrow Preserve for hikers and bird watchers. No fences, no fines, no HOA. Cheers broke out. Myers clapped me on the shoulder. The final image in every article that ran that week was the same. Me, standing on the dock, wind in my hair, holding up a county deed with a quiet, undeniable satisfaction on my face. As for Karen, she tried to stage a comeback, of course. Petitioned to form a new HOA district under a different name. Claimed she was the victim of political persecution, but the county had seen enough. So had her neighbors. She sold her house 3 weeks later and moved to towns over, where I heard she applied to join another HOA. They declined. These days, peace has returned to Lake Wildston. The loons sing at dusk. The pine needles rustle with wind, not tension. And every morning I walk out onto my dock with a mug of black coffee and the kind of silence you can only earn because some people inherit land but others become it, and this land remembers who tried to steal it.